Hopefully I can find that. Okay, we've had some questions on the upload project. We don't have a whole lot of answers. We are working on that. I checked with our director over engagement strategies that is actually spearheading that program. She said they are working with IBRC to make sure that each department will have access to Gateway to upload their own forms so that the auditor does not have to upload everybody's forms. I know that's your most important question, but we are working on getting that done so that you are not responsible for uploading anything other than your own required documents. And for you guys, that's pretty much going to be a funds ledger, monthly, that's going to be a funds ledger and board minutes. Okay. There is a memo that's going out the end of next week or first part of that week after about the project. Debbie assures me, I don't know how Stephanie and I are going to do this, but there will be additional training on this somehow, some way, whether it's a webinar or we just give up sleep. But we will be getting you some additional information on that as well. You know, the clerk is responsible for sending their own form up. Statutorily, the treasurer is supposed to give it to you and you're supposed to send it to us. But I think this will take the place of that so that they can, and we've talked to the treasurers about submitting their own copy, and they've actually been emailing them to us as well. So we'll work that out. We're not going to ding somebody where it comes from, but yeah, we might have to work it out within the county to make sure that it's getting up there as long as we're getting a copy of it. They still have to give the, yeah, they still have to go through the same process. The auditor has to get a copy. You have to have a copy to give to your governing boards. I mean, that hasn't changed. It's just that the only thing that might change is that you, the auditor, was supposed to then send us a copy of it. And the upload would take the place of the county getting that to us. But everything else stays the same. You guys still need to see it and approve it. Mm-hmm. Yes. And if you submit it with yours, that's fine. But if you don't want to, they can, you know, we're getting them access so they can submit their own. Okay? And now on to everybody's favorite part, questions and answers. We didn't get as many, so we won't be here very long. So I'm sure you're thrilled about that. We are, Steffi and I, deeply, humbly grateful, and that is why we are willing to give up sleep, because Debbie came and answered most of these questions for us. We owe her big time. Yes, I was going to go over that a little later, but jump right in. No. No, what I want you to do is email them to me, because I won't remember from here to this afternoon when I get on to make a note of it. For anybody that has suggestions, you can send them to Stephanie and I. You can send them to your board. They'd be happy to have them. We always meet and try to get what topics you want. We try to get to you the information that you need. So if there's a topic you want considered, please send it. That doesn't automatically mean it will be, but it certainly will be considered when we sit down to discuss it. Never with the auditors, but with some others, I've had, you know, an individual office holder say, I want this, but nobody else wants it. So, you know, we have to take that in consideration because it's a large group and we have to meet as much as we can. But yes, send it to us or send it to your board.
And as a caveat to that, we don't care as a board if you send it to them, but please CC somebody on the board so that we know and we can support you.
Okay. All of these questions and answers, if you don't want to write them down, we will put them in the county bulletin, or if you have a follow-up question on it, you can email us and we'll be glad to discuss it. Sometimes we're not sure we're totally answering the question the way, you know, that we're getting all the information that needs answered. all of the questions that we got that were on deductions and exemptions, we gave to Matt. And he told me, and Matt's usually good on following up on his promises, that he will get a memo out with all of those to you guys much quicker than in the past. I think when Mike Duffy left, they kind of lost their procedures there, which happens, and they're trying to reestablish them, and so he said that this will be a priority. So those were handed over to DLGF because they're the ones that have to give you the answer, and those should be coming out. Okay, question regarding the County Bulletin June 2018 article entitled County Law Enforcement Continuing Education Fund. It quotes the statute that money in excess of $100 that is unencumbered and remains in a county law enforcement continuing fund for at least one entire calendar year from the date of its deposit shall at the end of a county's fiscal year deposited by the county auditor in the law enforcement training fund established under Indiana Code 5-2-1-13. Is this a state fund? And so we would send these funds to the auditor of state for deposit. Yes. Indiana Code 5-2-1-13 creates the Law Enforcement Academy Fund on the state funds ledger, which is under the authority of the Law Enforcement Training Board, which is a criminal justice agency of the state. The money is defined as excess under Indiana Code 5-2-8-1 would need to be transferred to the auditor of state, marked as that, and so that they can put them in that appropriate fund. If the wheel or excise surtax are deposited into the MVH fund, may those count towards the 50-50 split? There is a clarification on this common practice. You must use half of your MVH distributions from the state for construction, reconstruction, and preservation. And those are defined in the statute now, preservation is. So if other monies are receipted into the MVH fund, such as wheel or surtax, which has always historically been what we've done, then documentation must be maintained to demonstrate that only distributions from the MVH were used to determine the 50-50 split. The wheel and surtax does not have to be 50-50 on this, only the MVH distributions. We have worked with LTAP and NDOT on updating, if you hadn't already heard this, the annual highway operational report form. We've tried to do several webinars and district quadrant trainings for your highway people. We're at road school. We will be at the commissioners to let them know what the changes are, which should help report this information so that, you know, they're going to be working with you to get funds ledger information, but they should be able to document how they met that. Will the presentations be made available after the conference, either the PowerPoints or the recorded sessions? The PowerPoints that are not currently on SBOA, thank you, Fred, will be made available. I only got him 30 minutes before he spoke, guys. But the Auditors Association provides the videos on its website, so talk to your association on how you access those. Are TIF funds required to be appropriated in order to be used, or are they unappropriated? And a corollary to that, are the county TIF funds subject to county council approval when it comes to budgeting, additional appropriations, and transfer? Or is the Redevelopment Commission the only necessary authority over the TIF funds? I think as we heard yesterday, there's a lot of confusion about these. And I want to make one thing clear, which I'm not sure is always really clear. Redevelopment Commission can have funds under their control that are not tax increment financing funds. They can issue bonds, they can sell real estate, they can get grants, they can get contributions, they can have money within the general fund for their budget because they are a county department. You can have advances from those funds under statute. I'm trying to think there are bonds over there. They can do a special assessment tax. She did talk about that, where the tax goes to the Redevelopment Commission. Those are all Redevelopment Commission funds, but they're not necessarily TIF. Most of what I've seen, there with few exceptions, the Redevelopment Commission simply lives off their TIF. And that's where the problem comes in, because there's a lot more that the Redevelopment Commission can do with their funds than what they can do with the TIF. And that's our audit position. We are trying to get that clarified with the audit committee, because we may need some clarifying legislation on that. So remembering that in time, if you go through the TIF statute, which is I highly recommend reading that. I have read it about 15 times, and I always find something new. So it's in 36.714, and in section 3 of that, I highlight this, in subsection B, a redevelopment commission and a Department of Redevelopment, if I can talk, are subject to oversight by the legislative body of the unit, including a review by the legislative body of the commission's and department's annual budget. A redevelopment commission and a Department of Redevelopment are subject to State Board of Account audits, public meeting laws, public records laws. Again, legislative body, which makes you think for most counties is the commissioners, although in some counties it is the council. I think this was probably written for cities and towns more than counties, because the city council would be their legislative body and their fiscal body. So again, kind of clarifying, but it does talk about there being a rule by the governing board over their annual budget. Also, when they brought the funds back under the control, let's see. No, it's a different one. In section 23, each officer of the unit who has duties in respect to the funds and accounts of the unit shall perform the same duties with respect to those funds and accounts of the Department of Redevelopment, except as otherwise provided in this chapter. So they're saying they are county funds. So the commissioners do not approve the claims, the Redevelopment Commission approves the claims, but otherwise you're processing those claims just like you process all your other claims. Should be. And obviously, if they have a tax levy, that has to be budgeted, and that would go through regular budgeting, through DLGF and the whole budget process. We are building a new jail, which is probably everybody. The bonds issued are being held by a bank and the new jail by a holding corporation. Would the expenditures made through the bank be included as part of the county's expenditures in the AFR, or would only the payment for the debt be included on the AFR when this occurs? Then that occurs at a future time. Okay, you have to be sure that and I hopefully it has been, that you've set that building corp up properly. And if you have, they have their own board. That board approves their claims and oversees the project. That board is responsible for reporting on that. And all you would show is your lease rental obligation to the building corp. And I know it gets confusing because sometimes they set that up. They have to have their own board. They should have their own treasurer, and a lot of times they just throw it back on you guys. But they should have their own funds and be accounting for that, and they could be audited as a separate governmental entity if it's set up properly. After a commission or tax sale, everything was paid in full. That's wonderful. I don't think I've ever seen that before. The leftover money was considered surplus. How do they account for it? If you look at 6-1.1-24-7, it states if the money is not claimed after a 3-year period from the date of receipt, then it goes into the general fund, just like surplus tax sale. May the perpetuation fund for recorders be used for operating costs? Yes, it can, but it's not simple. The Recorder Perpetuation Fund is one of those we talked about, can be spent without appropriation by the recorders. They can use it for salaries of their staff that are working, that meet the definition of the purpose of that fund, which is maintaining the records and the record-keeping system. Kind of simplified, but that's in there. However, under 36-2-7-10.22, it also authorizes them, if the recorder determines that there is more money in the fund than they need to do their annual payments and any future upgrades, and they've got a plan set out. They know what it's going to cost to upgrade their software or buy a new system or whatever, and they've determined that there is more money than is needed in there. They are to certify that amount to your council. Council can accept that and appropriate that for operating costs of the recorder's office. When we come into audit, in defense of your recorders, we're going to look for that certified statement. Want to know what their plan is and make sure they're in compliance with that. But if those requirements that are in 362710.2 are followed, then yes, it can be used to pay operating expenses of the recorder's office. Heritage Barn. What fund should it be receipted into and how should it be distributed? How do we disperse the Heritage Barn money? Should money go directly to the fire police or through the township trustee? Indiana Code 6-1.1-12-26-2 sets out the public safety fee that may be established by the county council. The fee is not to exceed $50. The county holds the fee in Fund 1226 for distribution. The fee is to be distributed equally between law enforcement and fire protection for the territory in which the barn is located, should be distributed to the fiscal officer of the unit that the law enforcement or fire protection is within. So clerk treasurer, township trustee, if it's a fire, they do the fire protection for that township. If the sheriff is doing it, then it would go into county general. Should election poll workers be paid through payroll or claims? I know y'all want to hear this again. The important thing is not initially not how they're paid, it is how their income is reported. If you know they are not going to earn enough in a year, you know they are not going to hit that $600 threshold where their income has to be reported. You can pay them through a claim. You can pay them through payroll. I wouldn't, because you're not going to withhold anything, but you can pay them through a claim. If it's above $600, they have to have a W-2. And I would think paying it through payroll would facilitate your getting them that W-2. If they already work for the county, they are your employee. This is additional compensation from their employer, the county. They are paid through payroll. Is that clearer? If you go, and we'll put the link in there. If you go to the IRS webpage, they actually have a bulletin or a notice on payment to election workers that goes through where the levels are, when you have to withhold, when you don't. So it's a good source to have. You might want to go there. Again, we'll put this in the bulletin, print it off and have it. And I would say, although we've had some questions on this, you guys administer payroll. So it doesn't really matter if the clerk doesn't like it. You've got to follow the rules, and they have to follow the rules. When a county gets DOC money back, can it be put in the jail fund or general fund? If you receive reimbursement for housing federal or state prisoners, felon 6, whatever that is, it needs to go into the fund that paid the original cost. That normally has been the general fund, but some of you are operating your jails out of public safety or a special purpose lit. It goes back into the fund that paid, it's a reimbursement of cost. It goes back in the fund that's paying those costs. Do statutory funds require an ordinance creating the funds? No, the statute itself creates the fund. So you don't need an ordinance to use a fund that's created by statute. By law, you got to use it. So they don't need to rubber stamp that or say that's okay. Use the funds on the chart of account. When you look at, and I know we've talked about this till you're like tired to run when you see me coming. If you go to the fund descriptions, the statutes are next to them to tell you where that information on that particular fund can be found. Do grant funds need an ordinance to establish? No. At the time of the agreement, the county is obligating itself with clearly defined criteria of the obligation, which automatically requires the creation of a fund to properly account for it. If you're accepting the grant, then you know it has to be accounted for separately. You can set up a grant fund for it. You need an ordinance that establishes the purpose of the fund. If you're doing a local fund, a home rule fund, you need an ordinance so that you know what's the purpose of the fund, what's the source of the funding, what can we spend it on, and what do we do when we're done with the fund. That all has to be determined at the time you set it up. Grant fund, the grant agreement gives you all of that. Money coming from the grantor agency is your source of funding. What you can do with it is included in the grant agreement. It should tell you what to do if there's a balance remaining, whether it has to come back to the state or whether you can roll it over into another year or use it for something else. So that's already in the grant agreement. So you can go ahead and set up those grant funds. We did have a question on ditches and being able to combine them into one parcel number, like NDOT, putting them all together. We don't have a problem with that, but I gave that to Matt because you're talking parcel numbers, and I'm not sure on the tax billing system or the new abstract if that's going to have an impact. So he's going to research that and put that in that bulletin or that memo that he's sending out. May highway employees be paid from wheel or excise surtax funds? The statutes do provide specific guidance in the order of what funds may be used in the operation of the highway department. So if you go to Indiana Code 8-18-8-5, there's not much else in that whole chapter except this. All expenses incurred in the maintenance of county highways shall first be paid out of funds from the gasoline tax, special fuel tax, and the motor vehicle registration fees that are paid to the counties by the state. In addition, a county may use the funds derived from the county vehicle excise tax, county wheel tax, local income tax, riverboat admission tax, riverboat wagering tax, and property taxes and miscellaneous revenues that have been deposited in the county general fund. So yes, wheel and surtax may be used to pay for highway employee compensation, but only after the MVH funds are used. Of course, if they're in with the MVH funds, you're gold. Does a 17T refund ever expire when a claim is never signed and returned? So I'm not sure, and you may need to follow up on this, or if the person who had this wants to, give us that. They have 3 years to file the claim from the date the tax is paid or from final disposition of an appeal. Sometimes you'll set those claims up just to start that clock for the 3 years. When they do an appeal under 6-1.1-15, that is considered the claim. So if they don't have a claim, that appeal is considered their claim at the same time. But we can find nothing in statute that says there's an expiration date on those claims. And the last one I hope I have already answered, but I will hit it again just so I go out with a bang. All grants, unless specifically stated in law, require an additional appropriation. Early this year, we received a memo stating that OPO, Operation Pullover Money, must be paid out as soon as the report was sent to the state, and the fund can have a negative balance until the reimbursement comes in. How do we handle this grant? The memo states we cannot wait for reimbursement. So I'm not really sure. I'd have to see the memo, what they're doing, but what I can pull out of that. Grants require appropriation unless they're federal grants that are paid in advance of the project disbursements. Federal government is real picky about those. One of the attributes we test when we do federal testing of your federal grants is cash management. Are you turning that money around in time? And some of them, like CDBG, it's like 3 to 5 days from when you get it, it better be out the door. They're very picky about that. That's an advance grant, okay? So I'm not sure how this Operation Pullover is working, but they do want you to spend that quickly. Reimbursement grants on the other side require you to pay first out of county funds and then get that reimbursement. We've already talked about it. If it's truly a reimbursement grant, then yes, it can be run in the negative as long as you're timely filing those claims for reimbursement and you're waiting for those to come in. And we will not take exception because that grant fund is in the red while you're waiting on those reimbursements to come in. So I don't, again, if, oh, go ahead.
Okay, what my question is about, like, county general, and you have the different departments, auditor, treasurer, so forth and so on. So our sheriff would like to, we have a 911 fund, okay? But he would like to create a 911 dispatch within county general. I mean, can you create departments, like within county general?
That would be a decision of your commissioners and your council, because they're gonna have to budget it. I'm not sure why he needs, I mean, is he not part of the PSAP or?
No, he is. He is. He's just always looking at ways to.
And
Appropriate
a lot
money.
of, we've a lot of questions, people, and that's why one of the big reasons we want to get out and do these quadrant meetings is so we can get in contact with some of the people that are causing you the most headaches, so that we can explain to them the difference between an appropriation and a fund balance. And an unused appropriation reverts to the general fund. It does not stay with your name on it in perpetuity. And creating another department when the appropriation could come out of the appropriate department in the first place doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's just making more work for everybody.
Well, he's been on this mission to where he says that there's not going to be enough 911 monies to, get through the budget for all of these years, because the county has taken over the 911, I don't know, 10 or so years ago, and he's always, saying how there's not enough money in there. And the coordinator or the head of the 911 was paid out of the sheriff's budget, which I don't know why. I mean, that was before, I ran for office and that, and he's not even really sure why. And so now, instead of, I think, putting it back in 911, he's kind of wanting to finagle ways to where maybe county general will keep absorbing some of these monies.
And I understand that, but does he understand that if you appropriate, let's say, you appropriate $100,000 for your local 911 and you don't need it because you get enough E911 funds from the state to run it, that $100 disappears. It goes right back in the general fund.
Right,
So it's not earmarking it for future.
right.
And so that's not going to help him.
And I think he
But
knows
if,
that,
if,
but
if, you're going to have to, if your PSAP does not have enough funds to run on the 911, then yeah, you got to supplement from general or public safety. So does any town or city that's contributing to that. Y'all got to sit back down again and say, we have additional expenses, so we all maybe need to pony up some more money to get into the PSAP fund to cover this.
But you really need to wait till you get to the point where you don't have any of those PSAP monies left. I mean, it's like trying to put the cart before the horse.
Yes,
You don't go ahead
exactly.
and expect to plan for this big future so you can, have all
Yes.
these monies. All right, thank you.
Should there be separate funds, Lori, for the OPO monies and the drunk driving money and the bicycle money? Should those all be kept in separate funds?
What are those funds?
Those are the sheriff's funds, the special grant sheriff's funds that pay.
Each grant should have its own fund. The reason we tell you to put your grant money in one fund is so you can account for it back to your grantor agency and we can audit it easier. I've been places where they just stuck all their federal money in one federal grant fund. It is a nightmare to figure out where that money went. So if you get a grant and it's X number of dollars and you spend it, all of your expenditures are there, it's all there. It's easier to report at the end of the year. It's easier for them to fill out the reports back to the grantor agency. This is what we did with our grant. That's why you want a separate fund for every grant. Any more questions? Uh-huh. We would be, yeah, we could audit it. We don't audit every department every time. They do kind of a risk assessment and look for it. If someone has said they think there's a problem in there, we can certainly audit it. The fact that department, or that court, another state agency does an internal audit on that does not prevent us from doing an audit.